400,000 years ago, the world was both familiar and alien. The continents sat roughly where they are now, their coastlines shaped by shifting ice ages. Vast glaciers advanced and retreated across the northern hemisphere. Forests stretched over lands that are now desert. Great beasts roamed plains that today lie beneath cities and farmland. Humanity, in the form we recognize, was still young, a species in the making, sharing the planet with other archaic humans and close cousins. And yet, when we look back that far, the historical record does not merely grow thin, it vanishes altogether. We are left with silence, with bones, with stone tools scattered like fragments of an unwritten epic. But what if that silence hides more than we imagine? Civilization, as we understand it, is recent. The ruins of Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, these are measured in thousands of years, not hundreds of thousands. But 400 millennia is a vast gulf of time, wide enough for countless rises and falls, enough for entire cycles of development to flourish and disappear. If such civilizations had ever existed, their traces would be buried beneath layers of earth and ice, ground down by the slow violence of time. The question is not only whether they could have existed, but whether we would even know if they had. Imagine peeling back the present like layers of sediment. Cities vanish beneath forests. Forests give way to plains. Ice sheets advance, crushing everything beneath them. Rivers shift their courses, carving new valleys, erasing old ones. Wind scours landscapes clean, burying evidence beneath shifting dunes. Over 400,000 years, even the grandest works would crumble into dust. Concrete, steel, glass, all would succumb to chemical weathering. Skyscrapers would collapse, bridges would fall, roads would be reclaimed by soil. In 100,000 years, most traces would be gone. In 400,000, they might be nothing more than subtle chemical signatures, faint anomalies waiting in the rocks to be discovered by some future intelligence. The human timeline is more complex than the simple arc we often imagine. 400,000 years ago, Homo sapiens were not alone. There were Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Asia, archaic humans in Africa, intelligent, tool-making, adaptive beings whose cognitive capacities may have been closer to ours than we once believed. Evidence of symbolic behavior, of controlled fire, of hunting strategies, and of early forms of art have pushed back the boundaries of what we thought possible for these ancient populations. If groups of humans or human-like beings had developed beyond what we assume, if they had reached levels of complexity that left only the faintest traces, our current archaeological lens might not be sharp enough to catch it. The Earth's surface is restless. Over the course of 400,000 years, coastlines have shifted dramatically due to glacial cycles. Vast areas of land that were once dry are now submerged beneath oceans, particularly along continental shelves. If a civilization had arisen near those ancient coastlines, its cities might now lie beneath hundreds of feet of water and sediment, unreachable except through deliberate, painstaking exploration. Most of the archaeological record we know is terrestrial, confined to what has not been buried by the sea. But the majority of humanity's likely habitats during ice ages were along shorelines now drowned. The map of potential lost worlds is far larger than the one we study on land. There are also geological processes to consider. Tectonic activity buries, folds, and metamorphoses rock over time. Caves collapse, sediments compact, minerals dissolve and reform. Organic materials vanish, leaving only traces. Even deliberate construction, if not maintained, succumbs to these forces. A modern city left untended would disappear into greenery within centuries, into ruin within millennia, and into anonymity within hundreds of millennia. The Earth does not preserve, it transforms. It is this relentless transformation that makes the question both haunting and plausible. Could civilizations have risen and fallen during those vast, unrecorded ages? Could they have left traces subtle enough to elude our current methods, hidden not by conspiracy but by the ordinary, inexorable passage of time? If such possibilities spark a quiet thrill in you, if you feel the pull of deep time and forgotten chapters, stay with us. We've only opened the first page of a story that reaches far beyond history's edges. Subscribe and follow as we descend further into the layers where memory dissolves and mystery begins. When archaeologists study the past, they rely on patterns, stone tools, bone fragments, hearths, pigments, the bones of ancient structures. But the further back we look, the more fragile these patterns become. Our deepest confirmed archaeological layers stretch back perhaps a few 100,000 years, mostly consisting of stone flakes and tools made by archaic humans. Yet this narrow window of evidence may not reflect the full scope of what once existed. It reflects only what survived. For a civilization to leave clear, undeniable traces after hundreds of thousands of years, it would have had to build in ways that resisted the elements far more effectively than our own works have. Even then, survival would not be guaranteed. Over such spans of time, even stone is ground down, and landscapes rewrite themselves again and again. The concept of the Silurian hypothesis, proposed by NASA scientists Gavin Schmidt and Adam Frank, was not intended to claim that advanced civilizations actually existed in deep time. Instead, it was a thought experiment. If an industrial civilization had existed millions of years ago, would we be able to detect its traces today? Their conclusion was sobering. After a few million years, most obvious artifacts, cities, tools, machines, would disappear entirely. Only subtle geochemical fingerprints might remain. Unusual isotope ratios in sedimentary layers, synthetic chemicals that resist natural degradation, abrupt changes in carbon cycles. In other words, even a civilization as technologically advanced as ours might vanish without leaving behind grand monuments, their memory surviving only in the chemistry of ancient rocks. Apply this reasoning not to millions of years, but to 400,000. It is a blink compared to geological epochs, but unimaginably long compared to human history. If a civilization had emerged briefly in that distant past, perhaps lasting for a few thousand years before vanishing, through disaster, climate shifts, or self-inflicted collapse, its ruins might now be buried beneath layers of soil, hidden beneath ocean sediments, or simply erased by erosion. The absence of obvious artifacts is not conclusive proof of non-existence. It may simply reflect the limitations of where and how we look. Much of the world's potential archaeological record lies beneath the waves. During the last glacial maximum, sea levels were over 100 meters lower than today. Entire continental shelves were exposed, forming broad coastal plains where rivers met the sea. These were likely the most hospitable regions for ancient human populations, offering abundant resources and temperate climates. If any culture had taken its first steps toward complexity, it might have done so along these vanished coasts. As the ice melted and the oceans rose, those landscapes were swallowed, their evidence entombed beneath silt and sand. Underwater archaeology is still in its infancy. The ocean floor is vast, and the technologies required to search it systematically are expensive and limited. We have explored more of Mars with robotic eyes than we have of our own submerged prehistory. Even on land, there are vast regions that remain virtually unexplored archaeologically. Dense jungles, shifting deserts, remote mountain valleys, all conceal secrets. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, dated to around 12,000 years ago, rewrote the story of human civilization by revealing monumental architecture older than agriculture itself. If such a site could remain hidden for mere millennia, what might lie buried beneath hundreds of thousands of years of geological change? Our timeline of civilization is built on what we have found, but that is a fraction of what exists, and an even smaller fraction of what may once have existed. Another clue comes not from artifacts, but from our understanding of human evolution. 400,000 years ago, the cognitive abilities of archaic humans were likely far more sophisticated than we once assumed. Evidence of controlled fire stretches back even further. Neanderthals and Denisovans, whose lineages overlapped with ours, were not simple brutes. They crafted tools with intention, adapted to harsh climates, and in some cases exhibited symbolic behavior. It is possible that small populations could have reached higher levels of organization and culture without spreading widely enough to leave traces we can easily find today. A localized civilization, arising and falling in isolation, might have left behind nothing recognizable after the passage of ages. The deeper we dig, both literally and metaphorically, the more our certainty begins to fray. The Earth's archives are incomplete, written on fragile pages that erode, burn, and sink. What remains is fragmentary, open to interpretation. Some scientists and thinkers have even speculated that certain unexplained anomalies in geological records, abrupt climate shifts, sudden changes in sediment chemistry, could, in theory, be signatures of events we do not yet understand. While mainstream explanations point toward natural processes, the mere act of asking whether something else could be hidden there forces us to reconsider the narrowness of our timeline. If this sense of deep uncertainty, this vertigo of time, pulls you further in, keep listening. The layers ahead are stranger still, where science meets imagination, and the silence of deep time speaks in whispers we have only begun to hear. Subscribe, and step with us into the parts of history that history itself has forgotten. Speculation is not a matter of abandoning evidence, but of acknowledging its absences. When we gaze back across 400,000 years, the fog of time thickens so completely that the imagination must act like a lantern, casting light into places the archaeological record cannot yet reach. In one timeline, there may have been scattered, isolated communities of humans or their close relatives who, for a brief span, learned to shape their world in ways far beyond what we currently credit them for. Perhaps they mastered materials unknown to us, or used perishable substances, wood, bone, resins, fabrics, that left no trace under the relentless crush of time. Perhaps they were seafarers, building coastal settlements along now-drowned shorelines, thriving for generations before rising seas reclaimed their world, erasing the evidence beneath sediment and salt. In another possibility, their civilization did not mirror ours in form or ambition. It may have been a civilization without cities, without massive stone monuments, without the geological arrogance of skyscrapers. It could have been decentralized, fluid, built on mobility and adaptation rather than permanence. Its legacy would not be walls but knowledge, rituals, language, technology transmitted through living memory rather than enduring stone. When that chain of transmission broke, the culture would vanish like breath on glass, leaving almost nothing behind but faint geological whispers. And then there is the more audacious thought that perhaps, for a brief and bright moment, an intelligent population emerged with capabilities equal to or beyond ours, only to fall victim to some calamity, climate upheaval, cosmic impact, disease, or their own unsustainable ambitions. In this vision, their world was not simply erased but collapsed inward, leaving behind no towering ruins, no colossal statues, no cities crumbling beneath vines, because the scale of time allowed the earth to sweep it all away. 100,000 years is enough to grind empires into grains of sand. 400,000 is enough to make even their ghosts hard to find. Each of these speculative paths forces us to confront our own fragility. We imagine that the traces of our civilization will endure, that our skyscrapers and satellites will mark our existence forever. But the earth is patient. Given time, it will fold our cities into sediments, dissolve our monuments, scatter our digital archives into dust. If some future intelligence were to look for evidence of us 400,000 years from now, what would they find? Perhaps a thin chemical layer in ancient rock, a sudden spike in greenhouse gases, fragments of plastic embedded in future strata. The rest might be gone, leaving them to ask the same questions we ask now. Were they truly here, or is this signature merely a trick of nature? This reflection turns inward, becoming a mirror. To consider lost civilizations is to consider the impermanence of our own. It reminds us that history is not a straight line stretching back to some fixed beginning. It is a tapestry with vast holes, burned and buried sections, forgotten threads. What we call prehistory is not a blank page. It is a book whose ink has faded, whose binding has come loose, whose earlier chapters lie scattered across landscapes we have barely begun to read. Perhaps our certainty about being the first is less a fact and more a story we tell ourselves because the alternative feels too vast, too humbling to grasp. And yet, there is wonder in this uncertainty. It suggests that Earth's deep past may still hold untold stories, buried not in myth but in silt, stone, and ocean. Each discovery, from a submerged structure to an anomalous chemical layer to a site older than we ever expected, reminds us that history has a way of surprising those who think it is settled. The possibility of civilizations 400,000 years ago is not simply a question of archaeology. It is a challenge to the scale of our imagination. If these forgotten timelines call to you, if you find yourself staring at landscapes and wondering what worlds once stood there, you are not alone. We will keep digging, not just through soil and rock, but through the boundaries of what we assume. Subscribe and walk with us as we trace the faint, fading footprints that time tried to erase. Perhaps there were no civilizations 400,000 years ago, only scattered peoples leaving behind simple tools. Perhaps that is the truth. But perhaps the Earth has had more stories than we know, each one rising, shining, and vanishing beneath the same stars we see tonight. In the vastness of time, our own civilization is but a single page. The deeper we look, the clearer it becomes. The book is far thicker than we thought, and most of it remains unread.